You know, when you think of sesame, this is probably what comes to mind. These tiny little seeds on a hamburger bun. But what if I told you that for most of its history, the most important part of this plant wasn't the seed at all? We're about to dive into a story of ancient innovation, a modern genetic mystery, and yeah, a looming threat to our food supply. And it all starts with a part of the plant you have probably never, ever thought about.
Yep, you heard that right. To really get to the heart of sesame's incredible story, we have to look right past the seeds that we all know and love. And instead, we got to focus on its leaves.
So today, we obviously cultivate sesame for its oil-rich seeds, but its wild relatives over in Africa? For centuries, they've been prized for something completely different, their leaves. See, when you cook them, they produce this slimy, mucilaginous substance.
And look, this isn't just some weird, quirky botanical fact. This slime was a revolutionary piece of food technology. I mean, a culinary breakthrough so important, its discovery is literally the stuff of legend.
This origin story from the Madi people of Uganda really paints a picture. Just imagine their staple food, this coarse, dry millet bread. Pretty tough to get down, right? But by creating a slippery sauce from these wild sesame leaves, the women completely transformed it. They made it easier to swallow, more digestible. I mean, that slimy sauce, it literally softened their entire diet.
And what's so incredible about this myth is how it shines a light on the huge role women played as humanity's first agricultural innovators. They were the ones out there experimenting, adapting wild plants, and basically clearing the path, so to speak, from just foraging to deliberate, thoughtful gardening. Now, this powerful, ancient connection to Africa's wild species sparked a huge scientific debate. Because if all the wild relatives are so diverse and useful there, well, does that mean Africa is where the sesame we cultivate today was first domesticated? For decades, botanists were totally divided. You had the African origin theory, pointing to that incredible diversity of wild species. But then, on the other hand, you had the Indian origin theory, which had its own compelling evidence from archaeology and ancient texts. The whole thing was just stuck. It was a complete stalemate. So to solve a mystery like this, you need the smoking gun. You need the original source, and scientists have a name for that. They call it the crop's progenitor, the one single wild ancestor from which the domesticated plant we know today evolved.
And then, finally, after all those years of debate, the answer came from the genes themselves. In 2015, molecular studies came in and delivered the final verdict, settling the argument once and for all just by comparing the plant's DNA.
And honestly, this is just a perfect illustration of how science works. The genetics were crystal clear. The direct ancestor of all the world's cultivated sesame is this weedy little species from India. So while Africa is this incredible hub of wild sesame diversity, the specific plant that we all know and love began its journey on the Indian subcontinent.
But this story is so much bigger than just one plant. It's about a whole family of unbelievably tough, resilient, and useful plants that we usually just dismiss with one simple four-letter word: weeds.
So let's completely reframe what weedy actually means here. For these plants, it's a superpower. It means they can thrive in the absolute harshest environments. I'm talking the sandy edges of the Sahara or cracked, rocky roadsides. It means they produce tons of seeds that can just lie there, dormant, for years, waiting for that one perfect moment to spring to life. They are, in a word, survivors.
And you won't believe how versatile they are. For subsistence farmers, these plants are like a living toolbox. They're emergency famine foods, they're traditional medicines for everything from fevers to skin sores. And that same slime that thickens a sauce, yeah, that can be used as construction plaster for huts or even to speed up the process of making shea butter. It's a whole portfolio of solutions in one humble plant family.
But here's where our story takes a turn. Because despite being these incredible survivors, these weedy superplants are now facing modern threats that their ancient resilience just can't handle. A priceless genetic resource is quietly and quickly vanishing. To really get what this threat looks like, let's zoom in on one specific and frankly very alarming example, a coastal species from India called Sesamum prostratum. You know, thanks to centuries of meticulous work by botanists, we have this crystal clear record of this plant's history. We have specimens and collections that show us exactly where it used to grow along the Indian coast for more than 200 years.
So what happens when researchers go back to those exact historical sites in 2020? Well, what they found was shocking. The plant was just gone. Gone from 71% of them. 71%. Wiped out by coastal development, urban sprawl, and aggressive invasive species that just completely choked it out.
And as if losing its home wasn't bad enough, this plant and its relatives are now facing a brand new, devastating biological threat. It's a disease called phyllidy, and it's truly nasty. It attacks the plant's flowers and turns them into these useless, leafy structures. This basically sterilizes the plant so it can't ever make seeds again. But here's the really scary part. Recent studies confirmed it's now infecting wild species that scientists used to think were completely immune. The firewall is gone.
So, why does any of this matter? I mean, why should we care about a few weeds disappearing from a distant coastline or catching some strange disease? Well, the answer is absolutely critical for our own future.
These wild plants are a living genetic library. They're a reservoir of priceless traits. I mean, think about it. Because they've survived for thousands of years in the toughest conditions imaginable, they hold the genetic keys to drought tolerance, heat resistance, and disease immunity. They're what's known as an orphan crop, often overlooked by big research institutes, but absolutely vital for the food security of the world's rural poor. And for breeding better, stronger crops for all of us. Losing them isn't just sad, it's like tearing pages out of our planet's survival guide.
And all of this really leaves us with one final and pretty urgent question. The next time you see a weed stubbornly growing through a crack in the pavement, maybe just give it a second look. Because you have to wonder, how many other overlooked plants out there hold secrets we simply can't afford to lose?